I just state what I have been stating here, all right? And we lived here in a rather low place, at least according to the doctor. It was a damp place. That was in Grove. And my father's health wasn't very good, and the doctor thought that he would be better in a higher climate, higher location, drier climate. So that was the time that we moved to a place called Bellagorian. And Bellagorian was near Rathfriland. And we spent, let me see, I think it was about 6 years in all that we lived in Bellagorian. Now, that was a country place. And the town nearest to it was Rathfriland. It was a rather peculiar town in many ways. It was built upon a hill, and they called it Rathfriland upon the hill. It was, you had to climb up a steep road if you wanted to get to it from any place. It didn't matter from which angle. Now, there was no train into Rathfriland. The train came to Ballerone. And when you got to Ballerone, you got off the train, and there was a gentleman by the name of Larry Downey. Now, he had a jaunting car, an Irish jaunting car, and he would be very pleased and happy to take you any place that you wished to go. Of course, it was his business, and naturally he was looking out for business at all times. So any time that you wanted to go from Ballerone station to Rathfriland, he would take you up in this jaunting car. That was quite an experience for some. It was the mode of travelling in Ireland at that time. It was public transportation and he got to Rathfriland, which you had to go up a big steep hill, and it took the horse quite all his strength to get up there. And when we got up there was a man sweeping the streets, and he was a kind of a poet, and so was Larry Downey. And this sweep was for the entertainment of the passengers, of course. They had it all fixed up between them. And this man would be sweeping the streets, and Larry would come up with a jaunting car, and he'd say, no, the other man would say to him, first of all, down to Ballerone it is not very far. But here comes Larry Downey with his jaunting car. And Larry then would say to him, you silly loon, lift up your broom and let a buddy by. And then the sweep would say to Larry, you silly loon, you have room to pass between the wall and I. And they had many more little poetical sayings in that line. Of course, that was to entertain the passengers, you see, and give them a little laugh and brighten their lives up a little, and keep them from thinking of the steep hill that they had come up and all the rest. Well, however, we lived, as I said, in Ballagorry, and to get to Rathfriland, of course, we had to go there once in a while to get some provisions, and we walked it. It was about, let me see now, about 3/4 of an hour's walk, more or less. And it was a very pleasant walk, a nice scenery, but the trouble was getting up the hill. And you had to puff your own way up the hill, walking. However, as time went on, they got more and more facilities, and life was a little easier. However, it was a good place for motoring at that time. The motorcycle races, I mean. And I owned one of those bicycles, those motors, later on after it had become famous. It was a Ridge Multi, they called it. That was the make. Now, a Ridge Multi was a cycle that had variable gears on it. And it kind of was automatic. So when you come to a kind of a hill or high place on the road, automatically it went into another gear. And as well as that, you could control it by your hand. And it was made on the principle of widening the pulley on one side and tightening it to make it smaller on the other side, which that was a belt-driven affair. And this was the one that won the race. So afterwards I was able to buy that.
They look more like bicycles.
Bicycle, oh yes,
motorcycles.
Yeah. Of course it was a glorified bicycle, you might say. Today the motorcycles are different kinds and they're heavier and stronger and all the rest of it. But those it was lighter. But however, I was able to go to work on that for quite a while when I was in Europe. Of course, I was living in Newcastle for 3 years there, working with the Irish Town Electric Light and Power Company. We were installing the electrical system. There was no electricity in the country at that time, and every little town was getting its own a power station, and that was our work. It was putting in the power station. We used anthracite coal at that time, and used it for what was called the suction gas engine then. It was, first of all, you had a generator that you filled up with anthracite coal. And after you got it burning pretty good, to get it burning, you had to use elbow grease for a while and blow up the fan, blow it up, and that made the fire burn up. When the coals got red, they were all enclosed in what they called a generator, a big stove enclosed in, and then there was a pipe from that to what we called the scrubber, and that was filled with coke, and the gas passing through that scrubber, through the coke, cleaned the gas. That was the cleanser. And we had water, a system too, in the scrubber to cool off the gas before it got to the engine. And once that the engine started, you had to start the engine in those days by hand. That was how you started your motorcycle in those days too. You ran along the road until the engine began to work, and after you heard the engine working, you jumped onto the bike pretty quick. If you didn't, it would go immediately. And we had to blow up the fire in the generator until we got the fire well going, and then the engine started. Well, I was pretty expert in that, and I got so expert that I could do it all alone myself. It only took two to start the engine. One to blow up keep the fire blowing and the air going through, but once you got the engine started, it sucked in the air. You didn't have to blow it in, it sucked it in. The suction stroke of the engine was like a pump, and it pumped the gas in from the generator through the scrubber where it was cleaned and cooled, and then came on and came through the throttle that was on the engine. You opened it up to a certain position, and then you pulled on the wheel on the belt, and the engine started up in that way. Once it was started, you didn't have to blow anymore. Then it went automatically itself. And you had to put in a bucket of coal every hour, just in the hopper. The hopper was up above, and it was a double hopper. You opened the top of it up, and you put in the bucket of coal, and then you shut the hopper again, the top of it. And then you pulled down on a handle, which allowed the anthracite coal to fall down into the generator. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. It was left open. So that's what our work was.
This was when you were working in Newcastle?
That's when we were working in Newcastle.
How old were you then?
Oh, wow, let me see now. I don't know. I would be about 17 or so right then. Before that, of course, I'd been in Belfast. They started me in the office, and I was doing office work for quite a while. And while then, of course, I had the privilege of going to college. I went to the Belfast Technical College at that time. I spent quite a time in the college learning the theological part of the business and other things. And I was very happy. Electronics and such on. I was sorry in one way that I had to leave that, because it was very interesting and instructive and got a good education in it. But the time came when I had to move on, you see, and they moved me on then to Newcastle. And I was there for the installation of the engine and the dynamo, a switchboard, and all like that. And I was the one that threw the switch that put on the lights the first time they were on. Of course, the mayor of the town thought he did, because there was a special switch for him put on the promenade. I remember that. And I remember when I got the signal, I was to put in the main switch on the switchboard, and I had everything ready, and I got the signal that he was just about to put the switch in, and I just put mine in, and they gave him a big cheer, and I got nothing. I was out of sight, you see. So, however, that's how that was done in those days. So when I was there a number of years, of course, I helped with all kinds of electrical work, the housework, the outside work of it and all. Learned all that. And then the boss came to me this day and they said, something wrong up in Uri. I don't think it's much, I think you can fix it up pretty well. They can't get things to work. So it's a long time since you had a vacation anyhow, which I never did when I was working in those days. And they said, you can go up there, it'll take you about 3 weeks and see what's wrong. Well, I went up there, went to Uri, and I had, he told me where I could go to lodge too. There was a place, let me see now, by the name of Mrs. Bond. That's where he had stayed in years time he was there. And I went to Mrs. Bond, and she was very happy to give me a place to sleep and to make me some food and everything that I needed like that. I remember she had other boarders too there, and we all had our own room. And Mrs. Bond's daughter was there, and she was nice and very kind to us. I remember that, but we had lots of fun there. I remember, of course, I was full of old mischief, you see, those days. And I remember when I would come back home weekends, before I left Newry, my father and mother had moved there. Before I left Newcastle, before I left Newcastle, father and mother had moved there and were living there.
To Newry?
I know, in Newcastle. Newcastle. And then there was a time that I got my brother into the electrical business too, you see there. Well, they were all living there, and the rest of them were going to school yet. I was the oldest, and I was working then. They were going to school yet, so they were living in Newcastle. So when I was in Uri, I would go home weekends sometimes to Newcastle. And I went on a bicycle. And then later on, then that's what I told you, I got the Ruddock, the motorcycle, and used that. Of course, I did a lot of work in the motorcycling too, because I'd buy an old motorcycle and I would fix it up and then sell it again and make myself a few extra pennies. Well, I would be leaving on a Saturday evening to go home.
Excuse me now.
For another in the same line.
You can sit there.
Before leaving, I thought I would always leave a little bit of fun for those who were in the house. So, in the bedroom in which I was, I would take all the pictures of the walls and I would wrap them up in the bed clothing and I'd bundle them all up, and perhaps sometimes I would turn the bed around and I'd put the chairs upside down, and sometimes I would put them in such a way against the door it was rather awkward to open the door. Well, I would leave the place and away I would go, but I can tell you, when I came back on Monday morning, I had to be very careful. Well, it brought a little life into the place anyhow, and I spent some time with Mrs. Bond there. Circumstances were such that health was given out, and I had to look for another place. I found another place, and it was called, let me see now, the Waverley Cafe, that's what it was called. And there's a little bakery there, and they had a little restaurant. Well, that suited me all right. I was sure of something to eat. Well, I slept up on the third floor, and some of the bakery men, bakery girls, and the restaurant people, they had their rooms too. Well, there were quite a few of us, and it was never lacking fun. And sometimes I had some of my own work people come to visit me, and some of them came to help out in the work when it was necessary. And when they came, there was always more fun. I remember one night, we went to bed, there were 3 of us boys in the one room, a big room and plenty of beds. And we heard something in the passageway outside the door. And we listened, and we heard some of the girls say, "What's the matter? What's wrong?" Well, the fact was that they had peppered our beds before we got into them. And they were listening to hear us sneeze, but we didn't sneeze. And they couldn't make it out. Well, of course, the secret of that was that we had been working on the engines, and the gas fumes had got into our lungs, which they did at times, and in that way the pepper evidently didn't take any effect, so therefore we were immune against their tricks. However, we didn't forget them, and of course we had many things. I rigged up a light above their bed, above the window rather, and it was only a 2-volt flashlight bulb that I used. Put the wires up to where our room was up above them, and put it on a little simple battery, and every once in a while I would touch the wires and cause lightning in the room that they thought was lightning, of course. And it got frequent, and they had been making lots of noise before, but when the lightning began to flash, they began to get quieter for some reason. And they mentioned it then that what was wrong, there's lots of lightning tonight. And then after we got them well frightened with the lightning, we put the light on and kept the light on. That frightened them some more. They couldn't make out what it was. Well, after they got onto the idea that some of our tricks they weren't so much afraid. But however, they got it back on us. We got up in the morning pretty early. We went to work sometimes about 4:30 or 5 before they were up. And there was no light in the house or no electricity in those days, only what we had put in. We were putting more and more in all the time, of course. And the house was in darkness coming down the stairs. When we reached the kitchen part of the house, there was 2 individuals standing there, and they didn't move. I said, "Good morning," and they never answered. And, well, of course, being young, we weren't very frightened in those days. We were used to the goblins and everything else you have in Ireland, and it didn't affect us in the least. So, however, we bid our visitors good morning and went on. Well, afterwards we found out that the girls had made up 2 dummy men and had placed them in our path, thinking they would frighten us in that way. But however, they didn't. Well, at another time, let me see now if I can remember. Yes. I remember one of the girls making an excuse that she had to go to bed early that night or something, and she went up the stairs. Luckily, they were sleeping on the ground below where we were. So she went up, and I was very suspicious. And I said to some of the boys, "I think we had better go upstairs early tonight." And we got up there without making much noise. Everything was quiet, very, very quiet. And the first thing we knew was that the bed was beginning to move. And we looked at the bed, it was as usual. And we looked behind, there was nothing there. But however, we knew that there was one of the girls at least underneath the bed. So we spoke to each other and made an excuse to go downstairs again, which we did. And I went and asked one of the other girls if she could kindly lend me a bed sheet. "A bed sheet?" she said. "What do you want with a bed sheet?" "Never mind. I would like you to lend me one of the bed sheets. And I'll make up to you in some other way for that afterwards." Well, she gave me the bed sheet. So I made a ghost of myself. Well, I was very good at that. I had good practice of being a ghost. I had practiced that when I was young, and I'd seen others practice it and do it and frighten the living whites out of people. So I dressed up as a ghost and crept up the stairs, and the other boys came behind me. And they got the orders to keep quiet, don't make a noise. So I got to the door with the sheet over my head, and still there was no response from inside. I walked into the center of the room, and I could hear one girl say, "I wonder if they're not coming soon to bed." And they were evidently getting tired lying in that position under the bed, and the one at the back of the bed too. However, to draw their attention, I gave a little flutter and I said, "Whoop." And that drew their attention, and they looked up, and one said, "It's a ghost." And the other one says, "Maybe it is a ghost. Let's get out of here." And the poor girl underneath the bed half killed herself getting out from underneath the bed, and the other one jumped right over the bed, and down the stairs those 2 girls went. I don't know how they got down so fast. It was a winding stair, and it took them some time to manipulate the corners, I know, but before you knew it, they were down there. Well, the lady of the house was down there too. Well, she was a good old soul, this, and she herself was quite an actor, and she wondered what was wrong. So the girls came down and told her there was a ghost up there. And however, she says, a ghost. Well, I didn't know there was a ghost in this house, she said. It could be, all the same. Well, we boys were up there laughing, laughing, laughing. And then up came our good old landlady, Mrs. Kearney was her name, if I'm not mistaken. And she saw us laughing, and she wanted to know the joke so she could laugh too. Well, we let her into the doings, and ha, 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 didn't she laugh? That was a good one on them, she said. So that was our life there. That was our private life, I mean. When we were off work, of course, when we were working, we were very sober, we were very capable, we were very earnest, and solemn at times and all like that. But this added to the spice of life, you know. So that was one of our exploits. Now, I can't tell you them all. There was many more than that. As time went on, that was during the war. And the landlady's husband had a brother. And his brother was in the war. He was in France for a long time, and he came home, and he was shell-shocked, if you know what that means. However, he and I were good friends. We slept in the same room. And when he came there at first, I welcomed him to my room, although it was his room by right, in one way, I suppose. However, he said, you and I are going to be companions here. Now there's something I want to tell you. If you come in, I don't care when you come in, when you open the door, you say, this is John. Don't forget to say that. Because if you don't, he says, I might be capable of thinking that you're a thief or someone after me. And then I'm very quick on the trigger, which indeed he was. He had his pistol. By the way, he slept with his pistol under his pillow, and I slept with my Bible under mine. So we were well protected. However, this dear man, anytime I would come in and he was in bed, I would just open the door, this is John. And that was all right. Well, he and I were very good friends, but once in a while he took too much drink just, and when he did, there was more fun. And he took a dislike against his brother in those times of his life when he had been indulging too much. So on this particular occasion, he came up, and I was already in the room reading, and he came in and he said, I'm going to do it tonight. And what are you going to do tonight? He said. That brother of mine, he says, I'm going to fix him. And he went and he got the revolver. And he told me that he wanted me to go down first of all with him to test it out. And he wanted to test it, he didn't know how it was working. He wanted to test it down underneath in the subway. Now there was a subway down there, and a big department store they had at that time. And he was going down there to test it and wanted me to go with him. Well, I said, all right, let's go. But I was quicker than he was. And when he went down, when I went down, his brother was there. I told him what was happening, and he said, it's better for you to get out. In fact, I said, it's better for you all to get out. Well, the thing was, his brother came home, and he came home hungry, and there was nothing for him to eat. So, anyhow, he forgot about going down to test his revolver. When he got to the kitchen, he said he was hungry, but he didn't see any of the women folk there. And he said he flew into a temper because they weren't there. I said, look here, man, you and I could live with there was never a woman in the world. And I said, what would you like? How many eggs would you like? Now, he liked eggs, I knew that. So he ordered 6 eggs. All right, I got him 6 eggs, fried eggs, ready to eat, and some bread, and of course tea. That was always on the go. And plenty of bread and all. And by that time, he wanted to get a good feed so that he would be able to do the work that he wanted to do. But I had told his brother, you see, and his brother came and peeked through the door, and he saw his revolver in his pocket. So what did his brother do? But he came behind him and he got the revolver out before that he knew, and away with the revolver. So there he was, he finished eating, and when he went to get his revolver to test it, wasn't there. Boy, he was in a rage there. He knew who had it, of course, and however we got him calmed down, and after he had eaten quite a bit, I had been drinking some before that, so I got him to consent to go upstairs and go to bed. I said, that's the best place for me. I'm going to go myself. I said, come on. And he went with me, just like a child. And he went to bed. So that was that over. There was no more trouble with the pistol after that. Although his brother kept it for some time until that they knew that he was in better form, and then he gave him back his revolver again. Well, that was in our private life, of course, as I said before, when we got in there after working hours. Sometimes it was late, sometimes it was earlier than others. But I spent a good life there, I might say, in that time. And then the time came, of course, when I had to move on and leave Newry altogether. There was many things that happened in my own private life that I never will forget in that place of the world. So then I went to Belfast.
You were saved in Newry.
I was saved in Newry, yes. I was saved there. You see,
And how old were you?
I was about 21, I should think, about that time. Before leaving Newcastle, special gospel meetings were started by my father. My father was a gospel preacher. And there was a Mr. John Rankin, came along, and he and my father had rented a place and they were going to have meetings. And I started to attend those meetings when I was free. But there was another object in my life too. I was busy working on a new invention at that time with another young man. And the most of my time was taken up with that. When I'd finish work, I would begin work again on this new invention. And we were making, to a certain extent, a little progress on it, although it was very slow. However, the time that my boss said that he would like me to go to Newry, I would only be there about 3 weeks. I left my study books behind me. I left my experimental apparatus behind me, all the magnets and all the wheels and the pulleys and everything else. I packed them up and left them to one side and said that I would have a real holiday. I wouldn't think of any such thing, and I would come back with my head clear and better fitted out to go ahead with the real work of my life, which I thought would be at that time. However, when I got to Newry, instead of being there 3 weeks, I was there for 3 years. So I remember after getting the power station in order and everything in order again, they asked me down there if I could do some other work for them, change some things around and put in an extra dynamo and I wire up the main switchboard to make other connections and have it so that they could switch back and forth from one to another, which I was very happy to do. And also there was the pneumatic dispatch wasn't working. Financial system in the big store that when you bought something, you give the clerk the money and he got that money and he put it into a cartridge and put it into dispatched tubes and sent it off to a central place. Well, some of them got stuck, these tubes, and I volunteered that I could do it all right, so I started on that, and I put that in perfect working order for them. Many other jobs I got in Uri, they would come to me for every little trouble. They couldn't get lots of private plants at that time, and many of the businesses couldn't go on if they didn't have the electricity that they made themselves, and they would come running to me when they got in trouble, and I would go and get them out of their trouble in a pretty quick time. However, I was busy in that way, but I had forgotten all about the invention that I was on. Thank the Lord at that time. The first Saturday that I was there, I had nothing to do. I had the things all in order. So I went out for a walk and went along the river's edge, and while I was there I began to think then. And I began to think of my future. And some verses that I had repeated and learned in Sunday school, that I had heard the gospel preachers use often, came before me. What shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? And I began to think of that. What would it profit me if I did this big invention? I was able to help many out. I did some wonderful things. If I should live to be 100 years of age, if I did many great things, if the papers would contain column after column of the wonderful things that I did in my life, what would it profit? Because when I would die, I would open up my eyes in hell. That's where I would be. I knew that. I knew it from a boy in the Sunday school. I heard it at my mother's knee. I heard it in the gospel meetings, and I knew it to be a fact that I was not ready to meet God in my sins. That's where I would be. And then, while the world would be reading all those wonderful things that I had done, I would be weeping in hell. And that made me think very, very much. However, that soon passed off, but one day, while I was at my work, a gentleman came in, asked for me, introduced himself, said, I didn't know him, but he said, I knew your father well. I preached along with him for many years. My name is Moneypenny, and I'm starting some meetings in Bestbrook, and I would like you to come and attend the meetings. Bestbrook was a place 2 miles away from Uri. I said I'd be very happy to when I was free. And that will be on Sunday nights, I told him, and also on Wednesday nights. I keep those 2 nights open, and of course I shall be happy to attend, which I did. Now then, I attended those meetings and I listened to the preacher, and I might say that he was a wonderful man. He suited my disposition very good. He wakened me up because I was more and more engaged and taken up with earthly things at that time too. And he brought the gospel out in a very clean way. First of all, he spoke about man's need. And he told us what we were. We were sinners before God. And our lives would be recorded and it would all be before us after death. And if we died in our sins, we would have to be punished because of our sins. Well, he was very faithful in bringing that out, and I must say that I began to think more seriously. However, I was there on one Wednesday night, I remember, and in those days I used my bicycle to go to the meetings. And there was no place to keep a bicycle, so it had to be brought in and left at the back of the hall. But this night someone took it right up to the front of the hall. So therefore I couldn't get out until everybody else was out. And while I was waiting, Mr. Moneypenny spoke to me and asked me if I was saved yet. I said no. I knew I wasn't, and that's a wonderful thing to know. And he said, why not? What age are you? I told him. Do you not think it's time? I said, yes, I do. He marked some passages in the Bible for me to read when I got home, prayed with me, and I went home. And of course, when I went in, a remark was made that I was a very good boy. I had been to my place of worship that night, and I was very good. That was, of course, those other boys and all who were there trying to make a little fun out of me. But that was all right with me. And I went to bed and was thoughtful, and I read the verses that he had given to me, and I also began in Revelation chapter 1. And I read right through until I came to Revelation chapter 22, almost all the book. Now the idea of that was to try and get anxious, to try and get serious, to try and help me to think more of spiritual things. But it didn't work. And when I got to near the end of the book, well, where were my thoughts? My thoughts were back to this invention again. I was making some improvements upon it, and in fact the matter is I was using it in one of the submarines. Now let me say that later on that very same thing that I was trying to do was perfected by some of the naval engineers, and it's working to this day. That was only one of the inventions that I had been thinking of. However, at that moment I had the...
what was it?
It was an electromagnet for the submarine, so that when the torpedo was coming to a boat, the magnet would be working in such a way that the missile would miss the boat. The magnet would have such an effect upon it that it would steer it away from the boat. Mm-hmm. And in that way, it wouldn't torpedo the boat. Now, that's what it was. However, I had it ready in my mind's eye, all fixed, all ready, and I was testing it out. That is in my mind's eye, you see. So I was standing at the switch, and there was other electronic apparatus there that were to tell me where the missile was coming from, so that I would know at the precise moment to put in the switch and read on the power and the magnets in such a way that the torpedo would, or at least the missile would miss its mark, and the lives would be saved and the boat wouldn't be torpedoed. Well, as I had my hand on the imaginary switch and I was thinking all this, then I said to myself, supposing it doesn't work? If it doesn't work, then what's going to happen? The whole ship is going to be blown up, and I'll be blown up with it. Now, then it came, I remember then that I had been reading through Revelation, and where were my thoughts now? Back to the same old thing. Couldn't get my thoughts to remain on spiritual things long enough. At least that's what I thought. So I really began to cry, and I went to bed crying. I went to sleep crying, And the next morning, of course, I had to be up at 5 o'clock, and when the alarm went up at 5, I jumped out of bed and got ready and got off to work to get everything in readiness for the day's work for everybody else in the world. You had to have the electricity on for them and everything, which I did, I had seen to. And then I came back then for breakfast in this place in which I was staying, and I came in through the door and I saw the morning paper sitting on the table. Now, I had no thought of what happened the night before, neither the gospel meeting nor my own thoughts of reading in Revelation, nor in my imaginary thoughts or anything else. I'd forgotten all about that. So the morning paper was sitting there. I lifted it up, and the first words I read were, Johnny Hartley dies of wounds received in action. Ah, that came home to me as a torpedo. That reached my heart and conscience. Johnny, that was, let me see, that was during World War I, and that would be about 1917. And he was a companion of mine. I went to Sunday school with him. In fact, I had tea with him 3 weeks before that. And he had been sent out to fight in France, and he was just 3 weeks out before he was killed. Well, then the awful fact had dawned. What should you next be called? Where would your soul forever be when once your time is gone? That's the thoughts that filled my heart then. And I sat down with a weary heart, finished breakfast, went back to work again. The work that morning took me down into the subway. I had to see about the pneumatic dispatch. I went down with a heavy foot, wondering if I was never going to be saved. In fact, I'd made up my mind I never would be saved, because I never could think long enough on spiritual things. And I went down, walked along the passage, fell down on my knees, and sent up a prayer to God. Oh God, have mercy on a poor guilty sinner like me. I'm afraid there's going to be no salvation for me. I can't think on these things. I can't get serious about them. And just then I remembered a hymn that was often sung.